right, so we're continuing our discussion of our unit on reform and reaction. So we talked about Japan and how Japan responded to the growing changes in the world in the 19th century. And today we're going to talk about the Ottoman Empire and why did the Ottoman Empire slip into a decline. So in this discussion, we're going to be going a little bit backwards. We're going to be going back in time to give you a little bit of history of the Ottoman Empire, just so you understand the point in which the Ottoman Empire is in the 19th century when they do begin to attempt to make some major reforms for themselves. Now, the Ottoman Empire is one of the longest running empires in the history of the world. And so if we look at this map, we can see the expansion of the Ottoman Empire over a period of time. So the Ottoman Empire really begins to start and come about. If you look at this map, in about 1359, we see that Ottomans Turkish people who actually came from Central Asia, came in, settled, began taking over this area here. And then they slowly began to expand outward, gaining these lands here, everything here in blue. Surrounding, you'll notice the city of Constantinople, which was all that was left of the Byzantine Empire, which they do eventually conquer in 1453. So if we see the period from 1451 to 1520 is a great period of expansion for the Ottoman Empire, because everything here in pink is all land that the Ottoman Empire acquires. And so you can see that they're a rather large empire. 1520 to 1566, they begin to acquire the land in gray. 1566 to 1683, they acquire the land in yellow, with just this last bit of land, this land kind of going back to the Safavids in 1603. So by 1683, that's when we see that the Ottoman Empire is at the height of its power. And you might have remembered someone named Suleiman the Magnificent. You might have learned about him in Ms. Canon's class. So he was kind of like the height of this age. After this time period, the Ottoman Empire is beginning to go into a decline. It is one of the longest running, like I said before, it's one of the longest running empires in the world. It lasts for 600 years. The Ottoman Empire doesn't end until after World War I. But the problem is, by the time it reaches its greatest extent in the 17th century, it has overexpanded itself, and it begins to become known as the sick man of Europe, which is not exactly how you want to be seen by the rest of the world if you're an empire, but they're referred to as the sick man of Europe. And at that point, so for the 17th century into the 18th century, it's almost like they were allowed to exist, because the realization of the great powers of Europe was that if the Ottoman Empire fell, it would create this huge, massive power vacuum, and all the powers would start scrambling, trying to gain control of the empire, and it would cause a massive war in Europe. But let's look a little bit at the Ottoman Empire, especially about what made the Ottoman Empire so good when it was good. So when we look here at the way that the Ottoman Empire was broken up. So you had the Sultan, who was at the head, that was the royal, the king, equivalent of a king. And then you had what we referred to as the divans. And that was kind of how the area was broken up. Now, one thing that's also interesting to note on this flow chart is the mallets. So within the Ottoman Empire, because it was a Muslim empire, they respect the people of the book. So the Christians and Jews would have to pay the jizya, I think I'm spelling that wrong. The jizya, which is the tax that non-Muslims had to pay, and they were allowed to practice their religion freely. Now, what happened is the country was the different religious groups were divided up into what were referred to as mallets. So you had your Muslims, your Christians, and your Jews, and they all lived very separate lives. Christians and Jews didn't interact with each other. Jews and Muslims didn't interact with each other. Muslims and Christians, so on and so forth. They did not interact with each other. The different mallets would have their own leaders, and they would answer to the Ottoman Sultan. So the Jews stayed separate, interacted with themselves, had their own political leader who then interacted with the larger Ottoman emperor, as did the Christians and as did the Muslims. So you didn't see like Jewish families and Muslim families interacting with each other. We also have in this system something that was really, really important during the height of the Ottoman Empire, something called, and I don't quite know, I'll admit that I do not quite know how to pronounce this, but the Devonshire system. And what this system was that every year, officials from the Ottoman Empire would go out and scour the countryside looking for the best and the brightest young boys, usually at around age 7 years old. Those young boys would be taken from their families. Now, they could be both Christian or Jewish families. They didn't necessarily just have to be Muslims. They would be taken away from their families. They would never see their families again. If they were non-Muslims, they would be converted to Islam and raised raised up to be Muslim. And they would be trained to become what are called Janissaries. Now, the Janissaries were the military. So these children would be, a reflection of the empire ethnically, because they would be taken from all over the empire. They were taken at the age of 7 for a couple of reasons. Number one, that was young enough that they could fully convert them into Islam. But number two, it was also old enough that they would remember, maybe not have clear memories, but if you think about yourself, you remember life before age 7. I have memories of being 6 or 5. They're not clear, but they're vague and they're there. So you would remember that you were not originally born into this system. You would know that you had a family that would have been Christian or Jewish. So you would have had some loyalty to them in some ways as well. And by doing this, they raised up these children to become either the Janissaries, which was the military, or if they were seen to be more bright and less military inclined, to be members of the government. So they kind of made up this whole system here. And what this did is created a fresh group of people every year coming in who were trained just for this purpose. It also created a society, like I said, that a government and military system that reflected ethnically the empire. And it was the best and the brightest, and you could not pass down this role of a Janissary. So basically, if you were a Janissary, or in essence a slave, your children would not be Janissaries. So you're not developing a hereditary class because of the Janissaries. And this was one thing that really made the Ottoman Empire, when it was at its height, a really strong, powerful empire. That whole system is eventually going to begin to decline, though. Now, one of the things also about the Ottoman Empire, especially when they were at their height, is that they were at the crossroads of trade. They're literally at the crossroads of Asia and Europe. This is a picture I took when I was in Istanbul. Istanbul is one of my absolute favorite cities in the world. It is an awesome, great city to go visit. This is a picture of what's called the spice market, or the Egyptian market. And if you go into this market, it's a huge bazaar filled with stalls with spices. Like, you can see all these various different huge, supplies of spices and various different goods, silk from all over the world. You would also have the Grand Bazaar, which was another huge, large marketplace. So this was a major center of trade. However, most of this trade was land-based trade. So as we move forward in history and we go into the age of exploration, the Ottoman Empire is going to be kind of surpassed by new trade routes, because the Europeans are going to begin sailing around Africa and going to Asia that way. And the trade routes, which was always more expensive to transport goods over land than over sea, are going to be bypassed. This is going to lead to some of the decline of the Ottoman Empire. The other thing is, like I said before, the Janissaries, the whole system that made them so effective, like you had this constant new fresh blood group of people coming in, and they couldn't become a hereditary group, began to become a hereditary group. The Janissaries were allowed to marry, and they were allowed to inherit property, and it began to form an aristocracy, a hereditary class of people. Another thing issue that happened was that the expansion of the Ottoman Empire stopped, and I'll talk about that in a second. But if we look at this picture here, this is a picture of Istanbul. This is looking over across this body of water, and the picture is called the Golden Horn. And then in the distance, you could see some of the major mosques. This is the Suleiman Mosque, and then this is the Egyptian market, which I just showed you a picture of. Here you can see, this is also another image of Istanbul. This over here, I didn't mean to move my picture. Why did my picture move? Sorry. Well, now I can't move it back. Oh, did this just Okay, sorry, I don't know what's happening. All right. Okay, sorry, my picture's moving. PowerPoint froze for a second. I apologize. This over here is Asia. This over here is Europe. This is also Europe. So this is literally the crossroads of the world. That's a really bad picture of me on top of the Galata Tower looking over the Ottoman, Istanbul. Now if you look at this picture, which is kind of interesting, you could see in the distance, this is the major palace of the Ottoman empires. And oh my lord, I can't remember the name of the palace. Oh, that's going to drive me crazy now. All right, when I remember it, I'll tell you in class. But that was the palace of the Ottoman emperors. This is Hagia Sophia. You might remember that in talking about the Byzantine Empire in Miss Canone's class. I know she has pictures of Hagia Sophia, which originally was a Christian church and then converted to a mosque. And then this right here is the Blue Mosque, which was built in an attempt to be bigger and outdo Hagia Sophia, then they wound up failing miserably. Here we can see this is what's referred to as the golden horn from space. So this is Istanbul. So you can see you have the Black Sea up here. You have the Sea of Marmara here, and all of the waterways that you have going through the Byzantine Empire, the Ottoman Empire. That's Hagia Sophia. That's another view of Hagia Sophia. That is the interior of Hagia Sophia, which gets converted to a mosque. And when it gets converted to a mosque, all of the Christian mosaics get covered up in the favor of Islamic art. Today, it is not a mosque and it is not a church. It is a museum, and so both artworks have been uncovered because they didn't destroy the Christian mosaics, they just covered them up. There's another really bad picture of me. It was really hot in Istanbul, and they didn't really have air conditioning. So there you can see Hagia Sophia. I really liked Hagia Sophia, so that's why I'm inundating you with pictures of Hagia Sophia. This is some of the Christian mosaics that were later that have been uncovered since the building became a museum. And then that's the Blue Mosque, which tried to mimic Hagia Sophia, but could not be as big. If you'll notice, within the Blue Mosque, they have these big, huge towers, which Hagia Sophia does not have because they could not figure out how to build the domes to support each other. In Hagia Sophia, if I go back to this picture, you can see there's no interior supports. The domes are supporting each other. And in the Blue Mosque, you have these big, huge pillars that they refer to as the elephant feet to kind of support the columns of to support the weight of the domes. Okay, so the Palace of the Ottomans, thank goodness I have this on here because it would have drove me crazy that I couldn't remember the name of it, is the Topkapi Palace, excuse me. So this was a major palace center for the Ottomans. The Ottoman palaces are not like palaces it's not like one big building, it's like a series of buildings. So these are some images of the Topkapi Palace. That is going into the harem, which is the women's quarters, the family's quarters. So outside guests would not be permitted in the harem. Men from outside the family would not be permitted into the harem because harem literally means forbidden. So this was the women's side of the palace. And here you can see this is some of the buildings, some of the rooms within the harem. This was the throne room within the harem. There's another bad picture of me in the throne room in the harem. You could see, though, how richly decorated this building was. It's one of the most beautiful places. That's the prince's quarters. That's the kitchens. Here you can see the Ottoman Sultan giving court. So, the Ottoman Empire begins to decline in the 17th century. There are two major battles. One actually occurs in the 16th century, and one occurs in the 17th century that begin to bring about the end of the Ottoman, or the weakening, because it's not the end of the Ottoman Empire, but the weakening of the Ottoman Empire. The first one is in 1571, the Battle of Lepanto. So the Battle of Lepanto was between the Ottoman Empire and the Spanish and the Austrians. The Spanish and the Austrians came from the same family, the Habsburgs. So it was the King of Spain and the King of the Spain's illegitimate brother Don Juan. That actually was a real person. And it was a major naval battle. And the result of this battle was that the Ottomans lost. And as a result of the Ottomans losing this battle, they lost control of the Mediterranean Sea. So that made their land routes even more important at a time when land routes really weren't becoming important because they lost any of their power they had over the sea. Now, if you look at this painting, this is another view of the painting. The Spanish are going to spin it that, God is shining down on them because Christianity is the true religion and we've defeated the Muslims and that's why we were able to win. That's how they're going to spin this whole victory. The other major battle is in 1683. The Ottomans attempted to take over the city of Vienna. Now, Vienna was the capital of the Austrian Empire, a major Central Eastern European empire. The Ottoman lands and the Austrian lands would have abutted against each other. So the Ottomans laid siege to Vienna. And here you can see this is the Pope appealing to King John Sobieski of Poland to come to the rescue. And the Ottomans were defeated with the help of Poland. The Ottomans were defeated, and they lost their attempt to try to take over Vienna. Here are the very happy people of Vienna welcoming King John Sobieski as he comes in on his victory. And there's the Ottomans attempting to fight. One thing that's also kind of interesting, little piece of trivia, you know how on the Ottoman flag you have the crescent moon, which is the symbol of Islam, or it's also on the flag of Turkey today. So the bakers in Vienna were so happy that they were able to defeat the Ottomans that they decided to make a treat that would be representative of them in their victory over the Turks. And so that's where the croissant came from, because the croissant is a crescent. And so when you're eating a croissant, you're literally eating the crescent moon of Islam. Who knew? And the other major battle is in 1699, the Battle of Karlowitz. Now, in this battle, the Ottomans actually began to lose territory. So we see that it's really the 17th century, the 1600s, is when the Ottoman Empire was at the height of its power, and then its power begins to decline. The Janissaries became the system that wasn't this cutting-edge fighting system anymore. They're being defeated in military battles. In addition to this, the whole government is starting to fall apart. Now, this is going to be my really bad historical reference. So if we think about the movie Aladdin, we think about the Sultan. And the Sultan was this kind of empty-headed man that didn't really know what was going on, but the real power behind the Sultan was Jafar, and Jafar was the villain. Well, the role that Jafar had in Aladdin, he was the vizier. So the vizier was the advisor to the Sultan. And so what happens over time, when the Ottoman Empire was at its height, the sons of the sultans were really well trained to take on the role of sultan when their fathers passed away. They, when they were teenagers, would be given control over a small province where they could kind of learn how to learn how to govern and kind of get real practical experience so that they were ready to rule when their fathers died. What happened is in the Ottoman Empire, it's a Muslim society, polygamy is allowed. The Ottoman sultans had multiple wives. They had multiple sons all around the same age. Because they had multiple wives, being the wife of the sultan didn't really give you much power. However, a sultan only has one mother. So being the mother of a sultan gave you a lot of power. So there was a lot of intrigue and fighting within the harem amongst all the various different wives of the sultan, angling to get their son to become the next heir to the sultan's throne. So as a result, it became really dangerous to be the oldest son of the sultan as you were a young kid growing up. So the young boys were then basically locked away in the harem, under lock and key, almost in a prison type situation for their own safety, so their stepmothers and their half-brothers could not get to them and try to kill them. So as a result, they didn't get to have that experience of going out and governing a province and gaining that real-life experience. And so as a result of that, the viziers gained more and more power, and they really began to control the empire. So the sultans were less prepared to rule. They relied very heavily on the viziers. The janissaries, which used to be this cutting-edge fighting force, becomes this hereditary system, and they began to gain a lot of power as well. And what made the empire unique all begins to fall apart, unfortunately. Now, the end of this is kind of, well, why was it able to survive? It survives until 1922 despite all of its weaknesses. So that's what we're going to talk about in class, because we're going to kind of talk about what did the Ottomans do to try to protect themselves and fix all of the problems that they had. But I'll see you in class. Have a lovely day.